Alright, time to do some magic stuff. Today I am going to be doing a video on a commander. Preston the Vanisher. He's a 4-drop, 3 and a white, and he's a 2/5 rabbit wizard that says whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't cast, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a 0/1 white illusion. Fairly straightforward. Immediately that tells you you're either doing reanimation stuff, which I mean in white not the greatest, or you're doing flicker stuff, which is primarily what we're going to be doing here because white flicker sounds about right to me. Its second ability, 1 and a white, sacrifice 5 illusions, and then exile target non-land permanent. Having removal stapled onto a commander is already good. Having exile stapled onto commander, that is fantastic. Sacrificing 5 illusions does seem like a lot, but it really isn't. You'll be making so many illusions with this deck that like this restriction is more of a suggestion, honestly. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a quick overview of the deck list, and then we can really dive into it. So this is the deck list, right? We're running 39 creatures, 40 if you include the commander. So already this is a very creature heavy deck. Instants are 15. There are 15 instants. 6 artifacts, primarily ramp stuff, 2 enchantments, 35 lands. I do think 35 is a good amount. I've tried with more. You end up bricking by just flooding yourself a lot of the time. And then 2 sorceries. Sure. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at the deck. And sort by custom, sure. Let's start with lands. The most basic stuff. So out of all of the sections here, I would say lands are probably the most what's the word? Flexible, right? You could run 35 planes in this deck. It's totally fine. You would have 0 problems just doing that. That being said, let's go ahead and take a look at what we have here, and then I can just sort of explain my thought process. And you can decide if it's something you want. First off, Windbrisk Heights. This is probably the one I would recommend keeping the most. Yes, it does come in tapped. Does it come in tapped? Yes, it does. It's part of the Hideaway ability. So Hideaway, if you don't know, is when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top, in this case, 4 cards of your library. You exile 1 face down underneath it, or just face down, and the rest go on the bottom. And then when for the Hideaways, whenever you fulfill whatever their condition is, you get to cast that thing for free. In this case, the condition is that you have attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn. The illusions that Preston makes are fully expendable. It doesn't matter. You swing with 3 of them, pay 1 white, and whatever it is exiled under Windbrisk, you slam it down. I think it's fantastic, though there is quite a bit of randomness involved, right? You need to pull something off of the Hideaway, otherwise, what's the point? Reliquary Tower. I think it's a good card to have here, just because ideally you will be drawing so many cards that a lot of the time you're going to wind up having to pitch 5-10 cards in your end step, which doesn't feel great, right? That being said, it's generally quite easy to decide what to get rid of based on just by looking at what you have currently on the board and what your opponents have. So I wouldn't say it's a huge detriment to not have it, though it is nice. It does make your life a little bit easier. Temple of the False God. I know people are very split on this, just in general. I think it's fine. Especially in a monocolor deck where you're not too worried about your colors. I think it's perfectly all right. That said, you do need 5 or more lands to make it to turn it on. This one I feel is more of a to taste. Like if it's something you like, throw it in there. Otherwise, plains is fine. Myriad Landscape. It's ramp. We don't exactly have a ton of options in white for ramp, so we take what we can get. That said, I don't think it's super necessary. If you don't like it, that it comes in tapped. Plains again, plains. Like I said, you could just run 35 plains. This deck would be totally fine. Step and Benalia both come in tapped. Already, that's a big red flag for a lot of people. So, you know, there's the planes. But I mean, these do kind of help in the early game if you end up flooding, or you just need to like fix the top of your deck so you're not just drawing it to garbage. That said, again, up to taste, you could just replace them with basics. It's not a problem. A Gunjo. Truthfully, I don't think this is at all necessary. Yes, having what's the word? Conditional removal in the form of land that doesn't come in tapped is extremely valuable. That said, the effect is mediocre. If something big is swinging at you, the 4 is not really going to matter. It's primarily in here just because I really like this deck, so I threw in all my expensive cards. I don't think A Gonjo is super, super expensive, but it's certainly not something I would just throw in willy-nilly, right? To any deck. But yeah, again, just the planes. It's essentially just the planes as is, so it's fine. To replace it. And finally, Emergence Zone. This one is more of a pet card for me. When you're in monocolor, even duocolor, having a colorless pip in your lands isn't such a huge detriment. And I believe that having the ability to flash, like the option to flash, for a turn, I think that's super useful, super effective. So it is something I do try to include in a lot of monocolor decks. That should be it for the lands. Let's go ahead and go to ramp. So the majority of our ramp is going to be creature based, for the very simple reason that if we flicker them, that counts as ramping, right? You flicker this card cartographer, you're going to get this one, this card cartographer, and a copy of it, both of which will look for planes for you. That's great. The only non-creature ramp we have are Soul Ring and Arcane Signet, which, yes, they are staples. They're just too good to not include. And Nyx Lotus. Now, Nyx Lotus is definitely one of the cards I'm a bit iffy on. Because, I mean, first of all, it's a 4-drop. If you're dropping a mana rock at 4, like, it's got to do a lot. It is contingent on you already being set up, right? If you have like 2 copies of Knight of the White Orchid, you will have 4 mana, 4 devotion, which will tap for 4 mana. One other point I want to note is that a lot of the time, this is going to be excess. You don't necessarily need all of this mana, right? You will already be generating quite a bit on your own. So this one is definitely up to taste. You could easily just replace it with another mana rock or another mana dork. One other thing of note are Mannequin and Plaguemore. Sorry, train of thought. They tap for colorless. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like that, but again, we're in monocolor. Getting your colors shouldn't be a problem. And I do believe that having them as a colorless creature source is significantly more valuable in this deck than having them as a colored mana rock. Also, I think Plaguemore could probably be a win con with the Infect if you're just able to like copy it a bunch and put down like an Anthem, some sort of Anthem ability or Lord ability. I haven't won that way yet, but hey, the possibility exists. And that's pretty much it. There is Solemn Sim. He's a bit expensive for ramp, but I mean, you have 5 copies of him. You can sack him to Preston for 5 draws and then exile something, which I think is neat. I don't know if you'll ever get to that point where you need to do that, but I think it's neat. Protection and recursion, sure. Right. So a lot of this has to do with keeping you safe or keeping your board safe. Primarily keeping your board safe. This might actually Kamiya False Hope might actually go into lock down the board category, but we'll keep him here for now. So let's start with him. Kamiya False Hope. You sacrifice him, prevent all combat damage. Fairly straightforward. You flicker him with your commander, you make copies, and those copies you can just keep stacking over and over again to continually, prevent damage from killing you. I mean, straightforward, right? Ascent from Avernus and Storm of Souls, basically for our purposes, do the same thing, where they return creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield, and this does two things, right? It keeps us from getting absolutely destroyed the moment someone plays a board wipe. But also, if your commander is in the graveyard and you bring everything back, it will see everything that was brought back. You will get all of those copy triggers. Like this could, like playing one of these with a full graveyard could easily swing the game in your favor by a huge margin. Like you don't even need to swing or exile anything. Just all the value you accrue of just blasting the board with tokens and whatever their ETBs are, phenomenal, fantastic. Cosmic Intervention is similar, but this one is more preventative, where if they would go to the grave instead of their exile, they return the end phase. The end result is the same. Your board is protected from a wipe, right? It does have Foretell, and if you don't recall or don't know, Foretell means you pay 2, exile it, and then after that turn you can play it for its Foretell cost. It is, in this case, it is the same as its base cost, but you are paying it in installments at that point, which is really nice. And Guardian of Faith phases all your stuff out. It is a poor man's Teferi's protection, in that it will protect your permanents, it won't protect you. Sorry, it'll protect your creatures, it won't protect you. It is good to have in this deck because you can flicker it. Get more copies of it, phase out more stuff over and over again. You just have to have a way to not die when people swing their crap at you, right? All right, we did ramp, land, Sure. Board lockdown. These are cards, either I found them funny, or they're there to stop people from just running you over early, or not early, just running you over in general. Stone-Owned Dignitary and Windborn Muse are both great at sort of stalling out, combat-based strategies. You know, Stonehorn Dignitary will stack. If you flicker this guy, make 2 copies of him, someone is skipping their next 2 combat phases. Or 2 people are skipping 1 combat phase. However you want to do it. Keep doing it over and over, you can make someone skip however many combat phases you want. It is actually super frustrating for people. That being said, my group is fine with it. They don't really mind too much. This is definitely something I would I would talk with your group with first before putting it on the table, because people will get very annoyed if you just turn off their decks. Windborn Muse is a bit of a less brutal version of that. It just says that they can't attack you, right? Because if you flicker a bunch of these and they have to pay like 2, 4, 6 per creature attacking you, that token strategy deck, that thing's never swinging at you. It's not happening. But that said, it isn't so debilitating that they would get too terribly frustrated unless it's just a 1v1, in which case, why haven't you won yet, right? And then Yosei the Morningstar. This is another one where you really need to be sure your group is okay with it. Otherwise, someone is going to stab you after the game. Absolutely. No questions asked. I'd be surprised if they didn't do it during the game. Okay. So the thing about Preston, right? So stuff like other doublers, effect doublers like Elish Norn. Right? Where abilities trigger twice will only work on ETBs. The thing about Preston is that he doesn't double ETBs, he makes copies of stuff, right? Which means that if you were to make a copy of Yosei, who is a legendary creature, the copy will die as a state-based action. And when it dies as a state-based action, its trigger will still go on the stack. You can make someone skip any number of untapped steps you want, tap as many permanents as you want, as long as you can flicker this guy. It is if you have him and your commander on the board and you can resolve flickers, someone's just out of the game. They haven't lost, but they are not playing Magic anymore. They are sitting there and they are watching you and they are feeling sad because their board does nothing for as long as you deem necessary. It is a brutal, brutal, brutal way to lock down the board. If your pod is not okay with this, if anyone in your pod does not want to deal with this, I highly recommend not bringing it. Someone's going to hurt you. Not in the game. Someone is going to hurt you in real life. You have been warned. That said, I think it's a very powerful effect, and if your group's cool with it, I actually think it's kind of funny to play. Let me see. I'm just going by like the smallest groups here, so I'm not like just talking endlessly. Yes. We'll get back to this one later. Doublers, sure. They double ETBs. It's straight. They double ETBs. That's all they do. It's in the name. Norn is a bit more pricey than Panharmonicon, both in terms of, physical money cost and also in terms of mana. It does have that nice stat block of 4/7 for 5. Like, who decided that was a good idea? Like, why? But also it stops your opponent's stuff from ETBing, which, depending on the deck your opponents are playing, that could be pretty terrible. There's a reason no one likes the Phyrexians. And I mean, everyone knows Panharmonicon does, I would like to think. But if you don't, ETBs trigger twice. As long as it's from not even ETBs. As long as something activates as a result of a creature entering, any creature entering, it will double. Not double. It triggers an additional time. In most cases, that will be double. But yeah, fairly self-explanatory. I don't think we need to go too in-depth into that. Sure. Let's do our draw. Okay. These are just draw creatures. You play them, you draw a card. You flicker them, you draw 2 cards. One for the original, one for the one coming down. Oh, sorry. One thing I wanted to know about doublers. So the thing with doublers is that they will stack with Preston in a very disgusting way, right? So when something enters and it wasn't cast, you create a copy of it, right? This is an ETB effect. Something else has entered the battlefield, triggers this ETB, which means doublers will make 2 copies of that instead. However, if those things have ETBs, each of them, the 3, are going to double as well. So if you have Preston and one of these guys on the board, all your flickers are going to be having ETBs go off for 6, right? So if we go back to our draw tab, you have Spirited Companion on the board, for example. You flicker this guy, you make 2 additional Spirited Companions on top of the primary one, you draw 6 cards. It is disgusting. I love it. It is disgusting. But yeah, this section is, it's fairly self-explanatory. They come in, they draw a card, you flicker them, they draw more cards. Yay. Some of them gain you life. Some of them are actually just useless. Errand Rider of Gondor. Okay, first of all, there's not a ton of these abilities in white that aren't either hugely prohibitive in terms of cost or have some weird loopholes you need to jump through. Errand Rider of Gondor is probably one of the ones that are least restrictive. All he cares about is having a legendary, so you're not putting stuff on the bottom. Which, if you're flickering him with your commander on the board, yeah, you have a legendary. And Rumor Gatherer. Rumor Gatherer doesn't care about itself entering. It does care about other stuff entering. And 2 things need to enter in this deck. That's not going to be a problem, right? You flicker something, 1 enters, you get the trigger. The copy enters, you get the draw. I will say it does get kind of messy if you choose to make copies of Rumor Gatherer, because then you're keeping track of multiple instances of scry, multiple instances of draw, like when things are drawing. It's a bit of a mess. I wouldn't recommend doing it. You're better off just flickering one of these draw cards instead. It's kind of funny though. Right. Second, I believe this is our second to last. Is there anything other? I don't think so. Yeah. So with Flicker, we have, I believe, 4 categories that we can loosely base our flickers on, right? Or that we can place our flickers in, right? We have Fast Flicker, which will exile the card, the creature, and we'll just return it right away. Great for protecting your stuff from targeted removal, and also just immediately making copies of them if you need to, right? Ideally, you like stuff like Cloud Shift or Ephemerate especially, which will rebound. If you don't know, rebound will cast it again in your upkeep. Paraphrased. And these are both 1-drops. This is ideal. There exist 2 of them. They're both in this deck. More often than not, what you're going to see are 2-drops. That's fine. I would say that's standard rate. And then the 3-drops will also draw you a card. Not ideal, but again, we don't have a ton of options. The second category are slow, right? The slow flickers will remove the creature from the will exile the creature, and they come back in the end phase. We don't like this as much. It will protect from board wipes, but it only protects from a single creature from the board wipe. And it's really not great if you need to play immediately. These are probably the ones we'll phase out first once more of these sorts of effects come out, the fast flickers come out. The third type are going to be recursive flickers. So permanents that you play, like Gilrain as well, permanents that you play that will allow you to flicker stuff again, whether that be in your end phase or with Gilrain, just pay 2 to do it, right? That said, they are a bit heavier to drop, which, I mean, their value is great, so I wouldn't complain too much about it. I think it's fine. And then our fourth type, actually, we'll say there's 5. Our fourth type is creature-based, right? And these have the advantage of if you flicker them, they will flicker 2 things, one for themselves and one for the copy they make, which I think is quite good. Do note that a lot of these are going to have restrictions. Stalwart, for example, specifies non-warrior. It won't be able to loop with itself. Same thing with Restoration Angel. It won't be able to loop with itself. This one doesn't, and I mean, not everyone, but Felidar Guardian is pretty... It's very notorious. Like, this thing will go off on an infinite combo with like duct tape and a shoestring. It is fantastic. It is disgusting. And I mean, and you do have like slow varieties like Charming Prince will exile, return your end phase. And the final one is just mass exile, or I guess mass flicker. Is there a difference between flicker and bounce? I don't know. I assume they're the same thing, right? But the mass flicker ones is stuff like this. You exile a bunch of stuff, they all come back down. Fantastic for protecting you from board wipes, or just getting a bunch of ETBs to go off at once if you're like aiming for the finish, or at least trying to stifle someone so hard that they just give up. That's going to be a lot of his deck. Maybe people just get frustrated enough that they give up. One can dream, right? Lylezel's Acrobatics, same thing. It's a mass flicker. However, if you roll 10 to 20, it'll happen twice. So exile, return, and then exile again, come back in the end phase. If you get lucky with this one, that's fantastic. Otherwise, it's a little overcosted for what it does. You know, we want 3-drops like Ghostway, which will... 3-drops, yeah. Anything of note here? Oh, okay. Touch the Spirit Realm has a slow flicker ability on its channel. But if you absolutely need to, if there is a problem thing on your opponent's board, use it for its enchantment or its actual ability, right? Like, nothing wrong with that. You need to get rid of something, then it's there. Might as well use it. All right. I do believe that is it for our flicker, and then the last section in this thing is our miscellaneous. This is just stuff that gives you value. Moonshaker Cavalry is a fairly new one. We can do that. Moonshaker Cavalry is a fairly new one from Eldraine. The Wilds of Eldraine. And it's basically White Craterhoof, where it has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain flying and get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Again, White Craterhoof, it's a bit more expensive. It's 8. It's fine. You make a lot of mana here. Train of thought. Right. I mean, if you have a board of 0/1 illusion tokens, you just slam this thing down and suddenly they're fucking 50/50s. Who knows? Halo Fountain, again, you're making a ton of tokens. If you can slam this down for 3, just go to swings, tap everything down, and then just untap them. Pay 5, untap them, you win the game. Like, this is probably... I would say this is probably easiest win con. This requires the least amount of finagling with your opponents to actually do anything. These other two are not win cons. Angel of Invention is just an anthem, or I guess a lord effect in this case. Other creatures you get control get +1/+1. Flying Vigilance lifelink, that doesn't matter quite as much, and has Fabricate 2. The great thing about this is that since it has Fabricate 2, even if you make a 0/1 illusion copy of it, it could come in as a +2, as a 2/2, right? Otherwise, you just make tokens. Like, these tokens will grow, the servo tokens will grow pretty quickly if you're just continuously flickering this guy. Owl of the Dawn Sky is from the new Kamigawa Dragon Cycle. This second ability doesn't matter. You don't care about this one. This is the one that matters, right? So I did try to keep as many of our things as possible low in cost. So when he dies, you exile, or you look at the top 7, picks total mana 4 or less, slap it down on the battlefield as long as it's a permanent, right? So if you look at the top 7, you see Halo Fountain, you just put it down, for example. Which, I mean, that's huge value. And again, with our commander, it's not an ETB, it's not doubling ETBs, it's making copies. Which means since this is a legendary creature, it will die as a state-based action. When you flicker this thing, you basically get its trigger for free. And I do believe we've gone through everything. Let's see. Yeah. Right, we did go everything. Let's go through everything. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of pricing here. So I think I mentioned that this was a little bit pricier in terms of some of the individual cards in the deck. I mean, Moonshaker Cavalry on its own is a $15 card-ish. $15 to $20 depending. Now, you could do that. I don't think it's super necessary, right? There are options that you can have that you could have for like significantly cheaper. For example, something like Benelish Marshal, right? It's an anthem effect. As long as you can like flicker enough copies of him and you have a big enough army, it doesn't really matter that it's not this thing, right? You could easily win the game just by flickering or making copies of Benelish Marshal. It's fine. Same thing with Celestial Crusader. Like, these are both cheap cards. This one has flash. The thing with this one is that it only affects white creatures. So stuff like your artifact creatures, they're not going to get the benefit. I went back to this page as if I was looking at artifact creatures. Artifact creatures are not going to get the benefit because they don't have the color hit. They don't have the color identity of white. Right? Yeah, this can go away. And this can go away. That being said, having flash and flying on its own are, pretty good. You could just replace it with something else, right? Sure. Next, doublers. Norn is an $18 card, $18 to $20 card, 25, 27, dear lord. I don't know how accurate these are to what's on the website, but we're gonna go off of it because, I mean, the point is they're pricey, right? Nyx Lotus is a $4 card. Again, just replace that one if you don't like it. Same with this. I don't know how this thing is still like in the $2 to $3 range since it's been reprinted in goddamn every Commander Precon. I don't understand. Whatever. But back to Elesh Norn. Elesh Norn, and to a lesser degree Panharmonicon at $5. I find these to be more of a win more sort of card. Like, they're not necessary to your strategy, but they accelerate it greatly. That said, they can easily be replaced. Just throw in more flickers, throw in some other value sort of deals. Like, you don't need to have them. If your budget doesn't allow for them, you're not going to suffer too greatly. I promise you it's fine. Some things to keep in mind for some things that you might want to look at is stuff like Voyager Staff. Right? It's an artifact. It's a bit overcosted, right? You're paying total of 3 to flick or something slowly at that. That said, I mean, we don't have a ton of options. We are very limited in what we can do. Something else to keep in mind, something else you could replace it with, for example, are Distinguished Conjurer or Abdel Adrian. Abdel Adrian enters the battlefield, you exile any number of non-land permanents until he leaves, and for each one you create a soldier token. which is great, right? You put him down, you exile a bunch of your stuff, make a bunch of soldier tokens, and every time you flicker him, you get ETBs, you get copy tokens, and you get a bunch of soldier tokens. It's great. That being said, he is a 5-drop. Like I said, I was trying to keep this deck as low to the ground as possible, and when I did have him in the deck, it felt very clunky to use him, so I eventually dropped him. That said, if you want to drop Elish Norn or Panharmonicon, he's probably one that I would just include again. And Distinguished Conjurer is in that same vein of recurring flicker abilities, but it's a 5. It costs 5. I would say this part here is pretty negligible. You probably don't need that. It's probably not going to matter too much. But I mean, the option exists. I personally would not recommend it. Paying 5 to flicker one thing is pretty hefty. It's a pretty steep price. Out of the 3, Voyager Staff is probably your best bet there. Angel Invention's $2. I don't know what you would consider expensive, but again, Benelish Marshal or Celestial Crusader could just replace that. $4 on Cosmic Intervention. I wouldn't recommend cutting this one. You can, but I feel that the more protection that your board has from wipes, the better chances you stand of actually surviving. Because if your board gets wiped and you have no recourse, you're done. Like your game plan has been sent all the way back to Stone Age. You are done. So the more options you have to prevent that from happening, the better. Eerie Interlude. I did not realize Eerie Interlude was this pricey. Eerie Interlude and by extension Ghostway, which is significantly more pricey. I wouldn't say significantly. It's more pricey. Honestly, I can't recommend cutting these two. Having mass bounce is extremely useful, both and extremely flexible in terms of protecting your board, but also like exploding, just going off explosively. So if possible, definitely try to keep them in. Otherwise, you do have other options. They are not by any means great, right? You have stuff like Flicker, which are just awful. They're sorcery speed. They exile. I mean, it'll exile and return in one go at the very least, but it is not ideal. Also, why is this a $4 card? Never mind. Don't include this. This thing is trash. But then you have stuff like Against All Odds or Settle Beyond Reality. The upside of stuff like this is you have 2 effects that you can take advantage of. This one could be significant. You actually might get the value out of it. But ideally, you just don't want things to hit your graveyard to begin with. Again, it's a 4-drop. It's a bit pricey for what it does. You might find it a bit clunky. If you have no other options, go for it. Otherwise, try to keep Ghostway and Eerie Interlude in there. Settle Beyond Reality, it's a 5-drop that's a lot heavier, but also you exile something you don't control, so it's removal on top of everything else. Again, it's not ideal. We don't have a lot of options. We just got to work with what we've got. All right. And I mean, if you poke around, you can probably find some other things. You know, some stuff that'll draw you cards, some stuff that'll ramp you a bit, some stuff that has some effect of flicker that might be a little less efficient. But if you don't want to spend puts the expensive stuff in, then like I can't blame you, but you can always find replacements, right? Those are just sort of my recommendations. I think Halo Found's a $5 card. It's a win con. You don't necessarily need it. It does make your life a lot easier. Same with Moonshaker. So with anthems, you will typically need ways to flicker them multiple times to be able to swing for lethal. This thing, you just slam it down and start turning your card sideways. It cuts out a lot of the extra steps and extra resources that you need to spend to kill. It makes things a lot easier. I don't think it's necessary, like super necessary, but if you have it, I do think your game plan will be significantly smoother. That being said, $20 card, no one should be, obligated to spend $20 on a piece of cardboard just to make a deck work. So I don't believe this thing is necessary. If you can proxy it, absolutely. Otherwise, just run a Lord effect. It's fine. You'll be okay. Two things I wanted to note. I keep saying that. There's a lot of things I want to note. I really like this deck, so I'm talking a lot about it. Token doublers. Stuff like Mondrak and the newly spoiled Oger Tech. I mean, for this time period. When I'm recording this, this was just spoiled yesterday. Mondrak makes says if one or more tokens will be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. And Oger Tech Deepest Foundation says if one or more tokens will be created, 3 times are created instead. I don't know what the other side does. Doesn't matter as much. Okay. These guys, they're traps. They look good on paper. They are 100% traps. They're also very expensive. But no, absolute traps, I would highly not recommend including them in the deck. They do not do anything on their own for this deck, right? And what do I mean? What I mean by that is that if you play Mondrak and your commander is not on the board, you do nothing. He does nothing. He literally will do nothing if your commander is not on the board, because you do not have ways to make tokens without Preston. So he is 100% just win more. Like, it is unnecessary. He's a $27 card. I would not recommend it. It looks good on paper. It's a cool effect. It's not great for this deck specifically. It's too slow, and you will find that a lot of times there's just better stuff to play if you have 4 mana up. Same with Oger Tech, and he's a 6-drop, so that's even worse for you. Not necessary. You can probably just skip it. That would be my recommendation, at least. But yeah, that's the deck. If you wanted to give it a go, I'm going to go ahead and put a link down in the description. Actually, no, YouTube kind of yells at me when I try to put links in the description. Something about validation. I need to do that. I'll include it in the comment. I don't think I can pin stuff either until I do the validation thing, but we'll get to that. No one's commenting on these things anyway, so you should be able to see it. But yeah, that's a deck. Let's do a playtest real quick. We'll go to turn 7. This is definitely one of the decks that kind of wants you to have a strong start, otherwise you might have a rough time. I think it's great fun though, honestly. So we're turn 7 in hand, draw for 1. Landscape for turn, sure. Next turn, planes for turn, sure. We don't have anything we do right now. Pass. Planes for turn. Now we can either play Knight or we can crack Myriad. I would rather crack Myriad right now. So let's go ahead and grab 2 planes. That's not what was supposed to happen. Please. Planes and another planes. Both come in tapped. Shuffle, pass turn. Right? Okay, so see, this is the fact that this card exists is dumb as hell. But for now, we put down a planes for turn, tap 2, Knight of the White Orchid, grab another planes. No, we're gonna assume worst case scenario, no one has better stuff than us. That has more lands than us. In which case, there's no reason to play this guy. So why? But otherwise, we'll just pay 4. I guess we could put down Glimmer Point. Another target permanent. So I mean, it's not a May ability. You have to do it. Just if you don't want to exile anything on your side, exile one of your opponent's stuff. It doesn't matter. Pass turn, planes for turn. We're turn 5 right now. We can pay 4, put down our commander. And at this point, alarm bell should be going off in your opponent's heads, assuming they know what your commander does. So ideally, you want to have some way to protect it on the turn it comes down. But yeah, if you don't need to protect your commander, you can just pay 2, slip on the ring onto Glimmer Point. It makes a copy. You exile 2 things. They could be your stuff. They could be your opponent's stuff. Otherwise, you know, it's fine. We made a copy. Yeah, planes. And see, this is where stuff gets kind of dumb, right? Because we could easily just go off with Felidar in like 2 turns. But for now, let's go ahead and pay 5 and no. I do want to keep 4 up for Lyzels. See, that's the problem with these mass ones. They're very good for what they do, but you need to keep mana up for them. For now, even if we assume that there's no other what can I think? If there's no one else with more lands than us, we can just play Knight of the White Orchid to get more bodies on the board. And right now, since we have Felidar in hand, all we need to do is rush to a point where we can get him down and then Lyzels right afterwards. So pass, and I mean, assuming all goes well, turn 7, pay 4. Felidar comes down, and then you can either cast this immediately or wait for someone to try to remove it. When it comes down, we can exile Glimmer Point, which, I mean, this starts the chain, right? Like, the moment any flicker creature gets flickered itself, you start a chain with this deck. This is going to be a slow chain where in your end phase, you're always going to be making a copy of itself and something else and then exiling till the next end phase, right? We don't care about that for now, though, because what we can do at this point, pay 4, cast Lyzels Acrobatics, exile everything. By the time we go to the end phase, everything returns. Preston sees Felidar enter the battlefield, and that's basically game over, assuming no one has like instant speed responses. Because what happens when this enters the battlefield is that a copy gets created, it can start flickering itself infinitely, and when it does that, you can flicker your lands, you can flicker your creatures, you make infinite tokens, you make infinite mana, and then with his ability, you exile infinite things. You just exile their boards, basically. And that should put you at an overwhelming advantage. If you're not winning off of that, I really don't know what to tell you. That said, Felidar is a very specific way to win. The fact that we drew him was really lucky. A lot of the time, what's going to be happening is that you will instead be drawing into stuff like, let me see here. Like Windborn Muse, for example, where you're just stalling out the board and hoping they don't kill you. Sometimes you'll be drawing into, not sometimes. Ideally, you want to be drawing into stuff like Priest of the Ancient Lore, where he draws you a card, you flicker him, he draws you more cards, until you're able to get stuff like Owl down, or one of your big stall pieces like Windborn down, or even one of your really nasty stall pieces like Yosei down, right? This is the one that makes them skip their upkeep and tap all their shit. Or sorry, skip their untap and tap all their shit. Which, I mean, that's really, really mean, but funny. But yeah. There's a couple ways for this deck to be played. It's all token stuff. I love token stuff. It's fun. I love flickering things. It's really, really fun. But yeah, that's the deck. I'm going to go ahead and chuck this link down in a comment below. So if you wanted to check it out for yourself. But besides that, that is it. Yeah. Thank you for... This is a long video. I know. It's 43 minutes I'm seeing here. It's... Like, if you've stayed this long, congratulations and thank you. But yeah, I do hope you like this build. If you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear them. I really like this deck, so any ways to make it better, I am all down for. That said, I do have a budget. I'm not made out of money, unfortunately. But I mean, yeah. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.